Hi, welcome or welcome back to Books and Bocadillos. My name is Mariandrea, and today I have a long awaited book review. I want to start out by saying that I am dedicating this book review in memory of my father. Papá, esta reseña te la dedico a ti. Te hubiera encantado este libro. I am reviewing Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli. This was our January Books and Bocadillos book club pick this year. And we're in March. Yes, I am reviewing it now in March because I couldn't wrap my head around this in January. I finished it, I read it in January, but I had so many emotions stacked up while reading this book that it was really, really hard. I felt like I had just a pile up of emotions and jumbled thoughts. It was like the worst string of Christmas lights, like all tangled up and just needing time to unravel it all and look at myself, um, deal with myself like clearly. And I needed some distance. I don't know if that ever happens to you when you read a book and it just brings up a whole lot for you. And it's so hard to talk about it in the moment. And so I think everyone in the book club who read this with me in the month of January. It was a difficult month and it was a difficult book to read in the month of January for a lot of us. And I'm sorry I didn't get this I didn't get my head straight sooner in terms of like being able to talk about it clearly until now. But I thank you for your patience and for your trust and for your friendship. Thank you so much. So why am I reviewing this book? Because we read this in the month of January, and I promised you that I would review this book, and I want to review these books. The books that I've chosen for my book club selections are books that I'm genuinely interested in reading and supporting and amplifying the voice of the authors, the stories the authors are trying to tell. So Valeria Luiselli tells a story that I think is really important. She has experience in terms of working as a translator for unaccompanied children in federal U.S. custody through the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And she works on the legal end. She works with the attorneys who are interviewing the children to determine if they might qualify for legal relief. And in her experience as a translator, she gets to know the stories of the children, of parents looking for children within the system. And she is compelled. And so all of this is happening in real life for her. She actually, like, as Valeria Luiselli, worked as a translator. And she has a book called Tell Me How It Ends. And it's an essay in 40 questions. And these are the 40 questions that legal advocates ask the children in federal custody. And she writes her story, her memoir of what it was like to be a translator and the bonds that she forms with the kids that she is interviewing, and the reckoning that she's going through herself as she is also in the legal immigration system trying to apply for residency in the United States. So that's really interesting. So then Valeria Luiselli writes this piece of fiction, but it kind of feels a little bit like autofiction because she's referring to the children that she interviewed in Tell Me How It Ends, like that experience. It's like that piece of nonfiction is a thread that's pulled through in this novel, and this is a work of fiction. A little bit meta because you know Valeria Luiselli's background as a translator. You know her experience applying for residency, for legal residency in the United States, to be a legal permanent resident of the United States. and like, so her personal experience with the legal immigration system. And then you're reading a story that she very like very intelligently crafted. It's very layered. There's so many layers in this novel. I believe Valeria Luiselli wrote this novel during a writer's residency program through Shakespeare and Company, and I would love to like know more about what that experience was like as someone who is an aspiring writer or someone who likes the craft of writing and can only like dream of having such an opportunity, right, to go through a writer's residency program like the one at Shakespeare and Company. So that was really interesting to me. So Valeria Luiselli is telling the story as a writer and also as a bit of like memoir. It's not a memoir, but it's like you know that her story, her thoughts, her reflections are all inspiring this piece of fiction, of literary fiction. So of course I want to review it, and I want people to read this book, and um, I want to show appreciation and love for the work of Valeria Luiselli. This is so I read Tell Me How It Ends simultaneously as I was reading Lost Children Archive. And I have to say thank you to Aaron at Aaron Read a Book or Aaron Read a Book for cluing me in on how helpful that would be in terms of appreciating what Valeria Luiselli was trying to do. Excuse me, what Valeria Luiselli was trying to do in this novel. So let me back up a little bit now. This is Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli. This book was published in 2019. The publisher is Vintage Books, an imprint of Penguin Random House. And the book cover design, this is the book, paperback. The book cover design is by Iris Weinstein, Weinstein. Page count from like beginning to like the very end, including the Polaroids and the works cited page, is 361 pages. I read this in between paperback and audiobook. And content warnings, there's themes of family separation, troubled marriage. There's a bit of recreational drug use. And dare I say it, I mean, it's on the cover, lost children. So there are stories of lost children. Let me, before I get into my thoughts, I have my journal, my notes here, but I want to read the back, the publisher summary for you, and then a few things within the pages. So, in Valeria Luiselli's fiercely imaginative novel, a mother and father set out with their two children, a boy and a girl, driving from New York to Arizona in the heat of summer. As the family travels west through Virginia to Tennessee, across Oklahoma and Texas, their bonds begin to fray. A fissure is growing between the parents, one the children can almost feel beneath their feet. Through songs and maps and a Polaroid camera's lens, the children try to make sense of both their family's crisis and the larger one engulfing the news. The stories of thousands of kids trying to cross the southwestern border into the United States, but being detained or getting lost in the desert along the way. A breathtaking feat of literary virtuosity, Lost Children Archive is timely, compassionate, subtly hilarious, and formally inventive. A powerful, urgent story about what it is to be human and an inhuman in an inhuman world. The blurb that just sold me on this book is the one on the front cover by Tommy Orange, because I love Tommy Orange and I love the book There. Tommy Orange wrote, "Impossibly smart, full of beauty, heart, and insight. Everyone should read this book." And I wholeheartedly agree with Tommy Orange and this blurb. I want to read, here, yes, I dog-eared my pages, um, about Valeria Luiselli. Valeria Luiselli was born in Mexico City and grew up in South Korea, South Africa, and India. An acclaimed writer of both fiction and nonfiction, she is the author of the essay collections Sidewalks, the novels Faces in the Crowd, and The Story of My Teeth, and most recently Tell Me How It Ends, an essay in 40 questions. She is the recipient of a MacArthur Genius Grant and the winner of 2 Los Angeles Times Book Prizes and an American Book Award, and she has been nominated for the National Book Critics Circle Award twice and the Kirkus Prize on 3 occasions. She has been a National Book Foundation 5 under 35 honoree and the recipient of a Bearing Witness Fellowship from the Art for Justice Fund. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, Granta, and McSweeney's. Among other publications, she has been translated into more than 20 languages. She lives in New York City. And what else did I want to point out? So, the next book that I want to read from Valeria Luiselli's collection is The Story of My Teeth. I actually have had this book for years on my shelf, since probably like 2015, 2016. And I really want to read The Story of My Teeth. So I actually thought that would be the first Valeria Luiselli book I would read, and it'll be the third, but I'm really looking forward to it. Okay, so then back to my notes. My own synopsis, how I would describe this novel. So this is, I mentioned, a layered story. There is a layer of history. So there's a history of Native Americans in the United States, Western expansion, colonization, violence against Native Americans, about the First Nation, for the First Nations, the attack on the First Nations, the stolen land, um, the sense of colonization, essentially. So there's all of that history, and then there's a reality of what is happening at the time that this novel is set. So this novel is set in like the initial years of the Trump administration's first term. It's 2016 to 2018 when the narrative of kids in cages was surfacing all over the media, and Valeria Luiselli is compelled to lend her skills and her expertise. And I say kids in cages because that was the theme, like the subject. So I don't mean it in terms of like that it wasn't happening. It totally was happening, but I'm just saying like that was like the catchphrase. That's why I use quotation marks, because it was the catchphrase of the time. So this is when this is happening. And the media is telling us, alerting us, the people, that we're in an immigration crisis in the United States, which we'd been for years, and this was nothing new, but it became something different during that time. So there's that reality, the macro, and then there's a micro in which a family is setting off to pursue projects and dreams and compassion and interests and adventure. And so the larger reality, the socio-political reality, is in some ways coloring the reality of this family, and it's influencing the reality of the family. So you have the macro influencing the micro, and you have imagination, and there are times in this novel where there's this feeling of like you're in a dream, like there's like a dreamscape, or it's like a fugue state. It's a dreamlike essence is what I wrote in my notes, to where as a reader, at one point, you're thinking, is that really happening? Or is that being imagined by the characters? Or by this one character particularly? About three-fourths, two-thirds, three-fourths into the book. You're kind of wondering. So the book, as the threads, I'm kind of getting into it a little bit here. As the threads begin to unravel, you see more of a stream of consciousness. So this book shifts in the way in structure. So initially it's very structured. It's told in like very short passages, and then all of a sudden it's you see it transitioning into a stream of consciousness. So as the stakes get higher, you kind of lose the structure. But that's brilliant because you're feeling as a reader, by losing that sense of structure, you're feeling like things are going crazy here. Like there are no periods. It's like a constant state of like stream of consciousness and emotion and thoughts that are free flowing, and there's no stopping them. And it's just like an avalanche of thoughts and emotions right at you as a reader. And that's when the stakes are getting high and the emotions are getting high, and things are happening. And as the pace of the novel changes, it's kind of like the river, uh, like the river flows like with more pressure. I don't know how to explain that. Like I have the metaphor in my brain, but I'm not doing a good job executing that metaphor verbally. But the flow of emotions and thoughts just gets more and more and more intense. And Valeria Luiselli captures that by shifting the way she tells the story into more of a stream of consciousness approach. This is set on a road trip. We talked about this across the U.S. from New York to Arizona. I put my rating next, but I'll come back to the rating. So who would like this book? I wrote that people who like stream of consciousness, who like that style, fans of Virginia Woolf. There's mentions in the Works Cited page, which I recommend. If you're going to pick up this book, start by reading the Works Cited page before you start to read this book, because that's going to give you insights to help you understand what the writer is trying to do here. So Luiselli mentions that she is inspired in her writing of this novel by Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. So if you love Mrs. Dalloway, you like that style, you'll see that in this book. If you're a fan of Juan Rulfo, particularly Pedro Paramo, which influences this book as well, and I personally love Pedro Paramo, you will enjoy this book, and you'll see Pedro Paramo, like you'll see that essence of Pedro Paramo in this novel. It is also, if you love literary fiction, but maybe the kind of literary fiction that is experimental, then you'll get on with this book. This book is very experimental. Valeria Luiselli is playing. She is trying on new things. She is going into a closet and matching and just having a good time with style and prose and structure and characterization and voice. All of that is like, she's not holding back. I think she's really taking a lot of risks in her writing here, and I see that, and I applaud that. I think that takes a lot of I don't know, it's hard. It's a hard balancing act, and I think some people, especially people in the book club, felt like it was too much, and yes, it was a lot. She was doing a lot. So is it perfect? No. It's not perfect, but I really liked that she tried, and that she did a lot. It was a whole lot of of just work of crafting a story with just so much influencing it as a story. A read alike. The only read alike that I can think of is Pedro Paramo by Juan Rulfo. In Pedro Paramo, the main character is on the search for his father. So there is this kind of travel to it, and in search of his father, and he encounters a town that that's been deserted, um, and there are ghosts that surface and that are part of the story in Pedro Paramo. And Juan Rulfo says that it takes about 3 times to really fully comprehend the story of Pedro Paramo. I think that's true. It definitely calls for a reread. I feel similarly to this one. I think that on the first read through, it might feel like a lot. I think if I were to reread this again, it might feel a bit different. I might appreciate it in a different way on a reread, which I think that's what happens with Pedro Paramo. Okay, now a passage that I want to share. I selected this passage. It's a bit of a long one, but I wanted to give you a good taste for what she's doing, and it's at the beginning, so it's when there's still some structure before things get a little chaotic, or a lot chaotic. I'm reading off page 39, and this is there's shorter passages, so it's about 3 different little passages that I'm going to read. Acoustomology. Sound and space are connected in a way much deeper than we usually acknowledge. Not only do we come to know, understand, and feel our way in space through its sounds, which is the more obvious connection between the two, but we also experience space through the sounds overlaid upon it. For us, as a family, the sound of the radio has always charted the threefold transition from sleep, where we were each alone, to our tight togetherness in the early morning, to the wide world outside our home. We know the sound of the radio better than anything. It was the first thing we heard every morning in our apartment in New York when my husband got out of bed and turned it on. We all heard the sound of it bouncing off somewhere deep in our pillows and in our minds, and walked slowly from our beds into the kitchen. The morning then filled with opinions, urgency, facts, the smell of coffee beans, and we were all sitting at the table saying, "Pass the milk. Here's the salt. Thank you." Did you hear what they said? What they just said? Terrible news. Now inside the car, when we arrive through more populated areas, we scan for a radio signal and tune in. Whenever I can find news about the situation at the border, I raise the volume and we all listen. Hundreds of children arriving alone every day, thousands every week. The broadcasters are calling it an immigration crisis, a mass influx of children. They call it a sudden surge. They are undocumented, they are illegals, they are aliens, some say. They are refugees, legally entitled to protection, others argue. This law says that they should be protected. This other amendment says that they should not. Congress is divided. Public opinion is divided. The press is thriving on a surplus of controversy. Nonprofits are working overtime. Everyone has an opinion on the issue. No one agrees on anything. Presentiment, that long shadow. We agreed to drive only until dusk that day, and the days that will follow, never more than that. The children become difficult as soon as the light wanes. They sense the end of daytime, and the presentiment of longer shadows falling on the world shifts their mood, eclipses their softer daylight personalities. The boy, usually so mild in temperament, becomes mercurial and irritable. The girl, always full of enthusiasm and vitality, becomes demanding and a little melancholic. Jukeboxes and coffins. The town is called Front Royal in Virginia. The sun is setting and white supremacist something is playing full blast in the gas station where we stop to fill the tank. The cashier crosses herself quickly and quietly, avoiding eye contact when our total comes to $66.60. We had planned to find a restaurant or a diner, but after this, back in the car, we decided we'd rather pass unnoticed. Less than a mile from the gas station, we find a Motel 6 and pull into the parking lot. Checkout is prepaid, there's coffee in the reception area 24 hours a day, and a long clinical corridor leads to our room. We fetch a few basics from the trunk of the car. When we open the door, we find a room flooded with the kind of light that makes even soulless spaces like this one feel like a lovely childhood memory. Flowers stamped, bed sheets tucked tight under the mattress, dust particles suspended in a beam of sunlight that comes in through slightly parted green velvet curtains. The children occupy the space immediately, jump between the two beds, turn the television on, turn it off, drink water from the tap. For dinner, sitting on the edges of our beds, we eat dry cereal from the box, for, and it tastes good. When we're done, the children want to take a bath, so I fill the tub halfway for them, and then step outside the room to join my husband, our door left ajar in case one of the kids calls us in. They always need help with all the little bathroom routines, at least as far as it concerns bathroom habits. Parenthood seems at times like teaching an extinct, complicated religion. There are more rituals than rationales behind them, more faith than reasons. Unscrew the lid of the toothpaste tube like this, squeeze it like that, unroll only this amount of toilet paper, then either fold it this way or scrunch it up like this to wipe. Squirt the shampoo into your hand first, not directly on your head. Pull the plug to let the water drain only once you're outside the bathtub. My husband has taken out his recording gear and is sitting by the door of our room, holding up his boom. I sit next to him quietly, not wanting my presence to modify whatever he's trying to sample. We sit there cross-legged on the cement floor, resting our backs against the wall. We open beer cans and roll cigarettes in the room next door. A dog barks relentlessly from another room. 3 or 4 doors down, a man and his teenage daughter appear. He is low and large. She is toothpick-legged. Dressed only in a swimsuit and an unzipped jacket, they walk to a pickup parked in front of their door and step up. When the motor roars, the dog stops barking, then resumes more anxiously. I sip my beer, following the pickup as it drives away. The image of those two strangers, father, daughter, no mother, getting up into a pickup and driving together to a possible swimming pool for night practice in some town nearby reminds me of something Jack Kerouac said about Americans. After seeing them, you end up finally not knowing anymore whether a jukebox is sadder than a coffin. Though maybe Kerouac had said it of Robert Frank's pictures in his book The Americans, and not of Americans in general. My husband records a few more minutes of the dog barking until, summoned by the children in urgent need of help with the toothpaste and towels, we step back inside. Favorite lines. I picked a few from the beginning that I thought were striking to me. There's a passage here titled Alone Together, and the first line says, I suppose my husband and I simply hadn't prepared for the second part of our togetherness, the part where we just live the life we've been making. And I think that almost feels a bit true in marriages. You spend all this time preparing for marriage, and then you realize that there's a second part, and that's actually living through what you prepared for. And then on page 28, there's one line that says, children's words, in some ways, are the escape route of out of family dramas, taking us to their strangely luminous underworld, safe from our middle-class catastrophes. And then in that same passage, I like this little bit. Conversations in a family become linguistic archaeology. They build the world we share, layer it in a palimpsest, give meaning to our present and future. The question is, when in the future we dig into our intimate archive, replay our family tape, will it amount to a story, a soundscape, or will it all be sound rubble, noise, and debris? Feelings. So, my feelings while reading this book. So, this book was read in the month of January. I started out really, really loving this book, like really loving it, early in the month of January. And then January 21st happened, and then there were talks of mass deportations. And then as things in the novel were bubbling and were happening and were getting intense, and the family was unraveling, and 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 all this stuff was piling on in the novel. I felt like that was happening in real life. The threats of the mass deportations, the noticing, sounds changing, visuals changing, people in hiding, all of that just felt really difficult. I felt very complicated in the sense of knowing, okay, the story is set back in what, 2018, 2019, 2020, like pre-pandemic, in the years just before the pandemic. And then here we are years later, and there's a different immigration trauma happening, unraveling, in which people are fearful of mass deportations and family separation all over again, just looking and sounding a bit different. There's a lot of layers to this. There's the Native American storyline, the sins, the attacks on Native Americans, the killing of Native Americans, the ghosts of Native Americans. And I think that all of that was mentioned, but not explored fully because it was kind of like a backdrop that's to the side, and the novel just kind of spirals into something where this backdrop was left behind, and the spiraling is going in a different direction. There's dissonance, there's cognitive dissonance, there's that sense of that was then and this is now, but it still kind of feels like it's still relevant somehow. I felt like there were things that felt of a time and yet not, and yet still relevant, but it felt like it was of its time, but yet it's relevant in a different way. If I make any sense. And then there was trauma. There was trauma of remembering what happened, but what had been happening, but we just weren't told about it. And it wasn't in the news the way that it was during the novel, or during the time that the novel is set. And then the reality of lost children is still a reality. It has been. It's never not been a reality. And I think Valeria Luiselli was making that point. But I don't know if it was successful in getting across. But I know that I saw her making that point. I just don't know if everybody who reads this would see that. My one sentence review of this book is: a family tapestry unravels in the wind during a family road trip. And then in my reviews, I like to share a story or experience of my own. So I want to say that I do come with a little bit of bias to this novel. Back in 2000, 2008 to 2010, I worked with unaccompanied minors through the federal detention program, and so in that way I'm biased. I know the 40 questions, the kinds of questions that legal advocates will ask the kids in federal custody. I understand Valeria Luiselli's experience working with these minors. I too have a special place in my heart for especially immigrant and refugee children, but just immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers at large. I have dedicated a part of my career. I've from 2005 to 2011, I worked with um, asylum seekers, refugees, immigrants, um, survivors of human trafficking. So I have experience as a social worker in the field with these stories and these narratives and this trauma. I also have this recollection that I haven't been able to forget. I had a conversation at one point in maybe it was like 2020 or 2019, or maybe it was during, it was probably during the pandemic. I want to say maybe it was like 2020, 2021. I was having a conversation about what was happening on the border. I live on the border. I live in South Texas, so I live on the border. And we were having a conversation with some family members, and somebody said, how could a mother dot 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 how could a mother leave her children? How could a mother send for her child to make this trip, the trek from Central America through Mexico on a train, through smugglers' hands, from one smuggler to another, to cross the river, to come to be smuggled across the border? How could a mother? And that question has been bouncing around in my head since then. It wasn't the first time I'd ever heard the criticism, how could a mother? I remember in that time trying to say something along the lines of, I don't know, but I can only imagine the kinds of circumstances that would put a family through this situation. And can you imagine the kinds of circumstances that would put a family through this hardship, through the struggle, through the risks, through the fears, through the uncertainty, through the dangers, through the loss, through the trauma? I don't know. I don't know. But it must be a very difficult thing to go through. And who am I to cast judgment on the mothers, the grandmothers, the fathers, the absent fathers, the absent mothers? I don't know. I don't know. And I think Valeria Luiselli, in this novel, what it feels kind of meta to me is that she, like me, was hearing those conversations happening, all bouncing from NPR to cable news, through the radio stations, through people in coffee shops and bars and restaurants and grocery stores and magazines and everywhere. These conversations of, what in the world? WTF? Like, how in the world does this happen? And I think she started asking the question, like turning it inside. What would happen if it was my child? How would I feel as a mother? And I wonder if that is what set this story into motion. If this book were a food, it would be mole. Have you ever had mole? I say if this were a food, it would be mole. It would be make from scratch mole, not the kind of mole that comes in a jar, in a glass jar, and you just pour over some chicken or some rice. I think that this would be the made from scratch mole. The mole that requires you to put the peppers in the mortar and like the molcajete, and like really like mash them, like grind them up and masher just enough amounts of chocolate and maybe toast some nuts and mash those up as well. And mix everything, blend it all together and really calibrate those flavors. And in Mexico, mole is a delicacy. It's like the kind of dish that you have as a celebration or to mark a significant occasion. I will make mole for Day of the Dead to remember my grandmother. Um, it marks something important. I think Valeria Luiselli is trying to mark something important. And I think Valeria Luiselli is doing a lot. And mole has so many variations in Mexico. Every region has its own mole. I don't even know how many. There must be like hundreds of different types of mole. And I think that every mole just has like a different flair to it. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be authentic. That's all that it has to be, is authentic. And I think this novel is authentic. I think Valeria is writing from a point of authenticity. I think that she is letting her vulnerabilities through as a mother, as a woman, as a Mexicana. I think that she is thinking through some really hard things, and I think that she's trying and she's playing with form and playing with voice and trying to bring to life the story of a family that is caught in the in-between, in what is happening in the political context, in the social context, and what is tearing them apart on the inside. And mole is complicated, and it takes time, and this novel is complicated, and it takes time, and it takes patience. Mole takes patience. But mole is worth it. It's worth it. It's worth the time. It's worth the effort. It's worth it. And I feel like this novel was worth it. It was worth my struggles, getting through it emotionally, the traumas that it was lifting for me. All in all, I'm really glad I read it. I kind of feel like I said it was complicated. I kind of feel like it's beneficial to read it in two formats. What I like about the physical copy is that there are Polaroids. So the parents are creating this like collection of sounds and visuals. So the father is a sound artist and he is collecting sounds. And the kids are given Polaroids, like cameras, and they're just asked to snap pictures of everything just to document the trip. And so the pictures like this one, they're not perfect. They are the kinds of pictures that a kid would take, or that, like, it's not perfect photography, but it's still art, and it's still really cool to look at. So to look at the Polaroids, and also there's every person in the family gets a box that they get to have in the trunk of their car, and they get to store things that they're collecting through the road trip in this box that means something to them, that tells the story of the trip. So in, like, the book is divided in sections. So there's the father section, the mother section, the boys section, and the girls section. And at the start of each section, there's a breakdown of what's in their box. And I think that that's worth seeing, because when you're just listening to it, you don't enjoy it as much as when you actually see the list of things in the box. And the works cited page is a gem. I absolutely love this works cited page. So that's a helpful reference for this. And there's illustration credits here. So it's really helpful to have this, I think. And you get to see the actual like shift. So, you know, initially I read to you, and you see like there's breaks in the pages. There's like small passages. There's no chapters, but they're just like small sections or passages. And then in the back, it's just like that. It's just a run-on, like it's just no periods. It's fully stream of consciousness. So it's really cool to see the physical change in structure, like to see it visually, not just to like be caught up in the hurricane of words that you're listening to on audio. But the audio is great. It's told with multiple narrators, so you get to see the different voices. The boy's voice was the most controversial in the discussions on the Discord. Most people did not enjoy the boy's voice. The boy's voice, you know, it was a bit weird. It was a bit weird because it was almost like you expected the boy to sound younger, but the boy sounded older. And so the way that I kind of fine-tune my expectation for this voice is that I imagined Klaus from Lemony Snicket from a series of unfortunate events. And this boy sounded like Klaus. And they're about maybe, the boy in this one was maybe a little bit younger than Klaus, but he sounded like that, like a boy that is very bright and very grown up, like has maybe a more grown up voice than most of kids his age. So I kind of thought of Klaus when I was listening to the boy's voice. And the girl's voice sounded younger than I expected her to. So that was a bit weird. I think that the voices could have been fine-tuned a little bit more. But the audiobook was really, really great. It was amazing. I love the audiobook. So I'm kind of caught in this thing where if I was just rating the audiobook experience, like the listening experience, I would give it 5 stars. But I think that if you're not listening to the audiobook and you're not getting to hear those voices, and there's like music and there's audio, like there's sounds and there's things that make the audiobook really, really cool. If you're not experiencing the story audibly, then I probably would have given it 4 stars. So I'm kind of caught between, and I don't give half stars, so it'd be a cop out to say 4.5. Since I don't give half stars, I say I probably would give the physical reading experience 4 stars, and I gave the audiobook listening experience 5 stars. So that's where I landed with Valeria Luiselli's Lost Children Archive. Have you read this book? Let me know what you think. What did you think of this review format? This is just the second review that I post on my channel, like formal book review. So I'm open to feedback, suggestions, what would be better. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you being here. Stay tuned. The next book review that I post will be Olga Dies Streaming by Xochitl Gonzalez. And this was the book that the Books and Bocadillos book club read in the month of February. So stay tuned. Thank you so much. Hasta la próxima.